Started. Hello, hi everyone as you're coming in. Hello and welcome. We'll give it a minute as the room just opened and allow others to get in. Hi everyone, if you're just coming in, welcome. We're giving it one more minute. Hey, it's great to see some familiar names and some unfamiliar names. Welcome if this is your 100th Build Up webinar or your first webinar. We're excited to have you. While you're waiting, if you could put in the chat just a quick introduction and then everyone can see who's in the room here together. Maybe just who you are, where you're calling in from, your affiliation or your relation to this work, if it is useful. Okay, and just a reminder that in the chat there, you can select to chat to everyone or just to the host and panelists, and you'll want to select everyone so that everyone can see your introduction. Hi, Elena, thanks for chatting in. All right. Well, as we get started and as we're waiting for some more introductions to come in, I again just want to welcome you all to this webinar. BuildUp has been partnering with Conciliation Resources on the upcoming publication of the 31st issue of the Accord publication. And this is going to be published in early 2027. And the Accord 31 publication is focusing on integrating digital communications, data technologies, and AI into peacemaking policies, strategies, legal frameworks, etc., both as tools to be mediated with and spaces to be mediated on or about. And so to inform this publication that's upcoming, we've been hosting these workshops and webinars and interviews with the aim of increasing the maximum value possible of this publication for peacemaking organizations and individuals, but also to support the kind of information sharing within and between fields that come at this topic from very different angles. And so we're really excited today to have this specific angle here with the intersection of tech governance in kind of unpacking what are the cases, what's the case for peacemakers to be interested in and to be engaging in with tech governance communities, which are robust and existing already, and what are specific areas of tech governance that peacemakers can best contribute to. We're really excited to have here with us Dr. Ravi Iyer from the USC Neely Center for Ethical Leadership and Decision Making, also co-chair of the Council on Tech and Social Cohesion, and Lena Slackmulder, who also co-chairs this Council for Tech and Social Cohesion, this council that's really been driving this conversation forward about the intersection of tech governance and peacemaking, and Habibu Baku, who's a policy officer for the Bamako Forum on Social and Digital Cohesion. So we're really excited to have everyone here. As I said, we've done a few of these webinars. I'm going to post a link in the chat to the first of this series of webinars about Accord 31 in case you missed it. And with all of that said, I would love to now turn the time over to our guests and hosts of this meeting. Thanks, Ravi and Lena and Habibu.
Thank you so much, Julie, and so pleased to be here with all of you. Looking forward to this time that we have together, and we'll be sure to leave time for a good discussion and question and answer. So we're here to look at, how can digital platform govern people working to build a more peaceful world? As Julie said, we created the Council on Tech and Social Cohesion to really answer this key question of what if technology fostered trust and collaboration instead of driving polarization and violence? And the Council has brought together peace builders, technologists, researchers on polarization, as well as policy influencers to really ask this question of how can we shape technology, and particularly the design, And one of the things that we see that can lead to shifting and shaping the design of technology is regulation and policy. And so today we're going to be looking at what does that look like and what parts of technology are we really trying to shape. So I'm going to come in first with you, Ravi. For years, a lot of the dominant thinking about technology policy has been about content moderation. When we've seen these harms and hatred online, and many people I'm sure joining us today work in really divided and conflict affected contexts, we kind of think that we should try to remove that kind of content. But tell us a little bit more about why that approach of content moderation itself has been a bit challenging.
Yeah, so thank you everyone for being here. And yeah, I mean, so for a little bit of context, I also used to work at Meta for about 4.5 years on moderation issues. And we used to have these dashboards where we tracked the content that was, later taken down as hate speech or later taken down as bullying and harassment. And oftentimes, within a platform, you believe you succeeded. You'd often like drive these numbers down and to the right. And these are the same numbers that are often reported to people in society that, the prevalence of hate speech is like some very low number. And that's very different than people's experiences of these platforms. Oftentimes they're seeing divisive content regularly. Influencers are seeing how divisive content gets more reach than non-divisive content. And really it's about the definition, right? And so I think what I learned from that is that no definition of what is or is not hate speech or misinformation, et cetera, is ever going to really address these kinds of content. I often borrow a analogy from Maria Ressa. So she often talks about content moderation as taking a glass of water from a dirty stream and cleaning it and then dumping it back in the stream, right? And so without dealing with the thing that's upstream that's creating all that pollution in the first place. And so, maybe that's reasonable to maybe you're going to drink that glass of water. So maybe it's important to, it's not that it's bad to moderate content, but it's important to think about, what is creating those issues in the first place. So I often will think about three harms that there are three issues with content moderation. First there's under enforcement. So there's a lot of, and so if you see here on the upper right, there's often I'll talk about fear speech. So like around the George Floyd protest, for example, you'd see a lot of content saying that Antifa was part of the protests. And it's hard to say that no person who had any connection to Antifa was part of any protest, right, ahead of time. So it's often this, be afraid of immigrants, be afraid of protesters, be afraid of this or that, which is not misinformation. It's not something you can really decide like what people are or not allowed to be afraid of. And it's that kind of thing that really is hard to enforce upon. And if you look at what actually leads to violence in communities, oftentimes it's these reports of crimes or be afraid of this other group, not what is actually classified as hate speech. On the other side, you get over enforcement, right? So the second thing that's an issue with content moderation. Um, and so there's an article in Vanity Fair about, things like men are scum. That's the headline there. Um, and so, and there's also a BSR human rights report if you want to look more at over enforcement. But there's if you look at enforcement as the way to deal with content, oftentimes you're going to see people in a conflict talking about something in important and passionate ways, and all of a sudden they say something about, if you're in Ukraine and you say something about Russians, all of a sudden now you're tagged as engaging in hate speech. So, what really makes something dangerous, and that's what the graph on the left shows, is not really about what is being said, which is what content moderation deals with, but like who's saying it, who are they saying it to, the historical context, and just moderation is just not well suited to deal with that kind of issue. So we'll talk a little bit later about like the specifics about how you get more upstream, but really moderation is never going to deal with these issues at scale, and we need like a different lever, which to us is really around design.
Thanks, Ravi. So I want to, again, in terms of setting the scene of how are we operating as peace builders in a world where we live both in real life and online, I want to come to you, Habibu. You've been with Search for Common Ground, working across the Sahel and implementing quite large and vast digital peace building programs, digital literacy programs, efforts to stop the hatred and harm online from triggering real world violence. And I'm keen to hear, like, what have you learned in trying to do that work? And how does that relate to our conversation? Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Lena, for really asking exactly the right question. Because over the past few years, we have been making a lot of progress in digital peace building across the region, and specifically in the Sahel, where I am based. We invest a lot in social media monitoring systems, fact-checking networks, or early warning mechanism, and also amplifying constructive and peace-oriented voices. And in some extent, it's working because we are seeing like how it is contributing to making digital resilience, a digital ecosystem more resilient, and how also communities are aware about misinformation, malinformation, and disinformations, and how also journalists are better equipped, and civil society actors also more connected and responsive. So yes, we can say on this front there is a progress, but when I look based on our daily life here, what we are observing on the ground, it is very clear that even if we have this progress is being constantly outpaced by the system itself. And here is some realities that we observed. The first one is that rumors are faster than truth. So in our context, whether there is like an attack, a coup d'etat, or intercommunication or violence, a single piece of misinformation can reach thousands of people within a minute, and through platforms like specifically WhatsApp, for instance. But the time that the fact checkers we work with verify the information and response, sometimes the harms and the damage is already done. So we have seen situations where these rumors created panic in cities or directly contributed to community and intercommunity violence. So even when local responses system are strong, as I mentioned, so there is this structural, there is slower than the dynamic of amplification that is defined by the platform design. The second point is that most of the time the outrage dominates the visibility. The way that the platform are designed, like the emotional, the divisive content gets amplified more quicker than nuanced content or peace-oriented content. So even when we produce a high-quality content, for instance, or we verified an information, it simply cannot compete with the reach of the emotional and the divisive one. And the third observation or reality we are dealing with is also that despite all of that, the harmful patterns persist. Specifically, I can take the example of the tech-facilitated gender-based violence. So women face specifically harassment, threat, or coordinated attacks. So, and these are not just isolated incidents. They are enabled and amplified by the way that the platform themselves are designed, and it's pushed a lot of women to definitely quit the digital space, which is a direct loss for inclusive dialogue and social cohesion. So, what does this tell us here on the ground? It tells us that the issue is not just the digital peace building efforts are not effective. It's not that all the work we do at the community level are not effective, but they are operating, the work we are doing is operating in a system that continuously reproduce harm. So I think the very important points is how platforms are structured and how we make sure that It's not speed over accuracy. It's not emotion over nuance. It's not virality over responsibility. So to make sure that we put forward content that promote peace and social cohesion. So this is what I can say quickly. We can come back again on it, Lina. Thank you.
Thanks, Habibu. So here we are, right? We're understanding that moderation of content isn't enough, and that all of the digital resiliency work that many of us as peace builders do on the ground is also not enough. So what does it really look like? What are those design levers that matter when we're trying to create healthier digital experiences? Let's come back to you, Ravi.
Yeah, so moderation. When I worked at Meta, you would see these rumors that were spreading, thousands of miles away, and a platform's never going to be a good judge. And I don't think we want platforms to be judges of what is a good rumor, a true rumor, or a false rumor. Like, you just no one knows, right? Or at least no one at a platform knows. And so I think the question is, not, how do you figure out exactly what is true and false, or figure out exactly, what people should or should not be able to say. But like, as Habibu mentioned, rumors are spreading faster than truth. Divisive content is spreading faster than high quality content. Why don't we think of those as bugs in a system? And what is the driver of those bugs, right? And so we actually developed what you call break the glass measures. And so, Ben has spoken publicly about some of them. Some of them have come out in leaks. And they really are design changes that change the ecosystem, right? Like things like stopping optimizing for engagement. So, for example, Meta at some point stopped optimizing for comments and shares as much because, research has shown, external and internal research has shown that reshares often lead to more misinformation, to more divisive content. Same things with comments, right? A common theme, what some people call nut picking. You find something is done terrible on the other side, and you post something about it, and you get a bunch of comments where people go back and forth about like, yes, that's terrible. Look what a terrible thing they did. So you generate a ton of engagement, and that generates distribution, but it's not good distribution. And so these are the bugs, if you will, that in the design of the system that are leading to all the things that Habibu is seeing. This is why rumors spread faster than truth. This is why division is amplified. There are other design issues as well. Lead, if you want to the next slide for a second. I'll share this spreadsheet, which is on the bottom of this slide. And, just with colleagues, we've just been trying to document all these design levers. So, there are specific harms, and then how do we connect specific levers to those harms? And so things like recommender systems are big. Things like, a lot of this work is actually done first in the kids' online safety space. But the same things that like lead kids to see overly sexual content also, it's that sensational attention getting mechanism, right? So that leads kids to see sexual content, also leads all of us to see graphic content, divisive content, etc. So recommender systems are a big part of it. But you also see things like infinite scroll, autoplay, everything that makes things frictionless so that things just spread. There's a lack of negative feedback. So in society, we have all these ways where if you say something harmful, people don't stop you necessarily from saying it, but you experience some kind of negative feedback, right? Whereas online, it's oftentimes really easy to give people positive feedback, and it's hard to give people negative feedback. And so that's one way that these systems aren't designed in ways that reflect society and that actually would lead to higher quality content. So there's all sorts of these mechanisms that are being worked on across the world that I think that increasingly we're starting to understand the physics of social media, the physics of these products, and you're seeing regulators around the world hone in on these same design decisions. So you might have seen some of the lawsuits that were recently adjudicated in New Mexico and Los Angeles. Those were focused on the designs of these systems. Oftentimes, again, focused on the kids' online safety space, but with implications for peace builders, right? If algorithms are bad for kids, those algorithms are also bad for all of us. They set the wrong incentives for creators where, teens are creating overly sexual content. They also set the wrong incentives for news organizations. And news organizations and politicians will tell you that they produce more divisive and inflammatory content because of these systems. So you see the Digital Services Act starting to target algorithms. You see laws in California and New York targeting algorithms, starting with kids, but there are regulators who are starting to look at like, okay, well, we know it's bad for kids. Now what's the next step? You see things like, you see Australia, you see the UK, you see a lot of people really honing in on these designs of these systems and trying to create codes of practice and regulations, safety by design, that really can address these systems more upstream rather than trying to figure out, what are people saying and adjudicate that.
Thanks, Ravi. When we're sitting here looking at the map, one of the things that is really striking is that most of the efforts and initiatives around regulations that seek to hold the large digital platforms accountable is in what some would call the global north. That includes Australia, that includes some other countries in Asia, such as Korea. But we see a lot of the world without regulations at all. And this is not necessarily an accident. And I want to come to you, Habibu, to speak again about the work of trying to enable civil society actors to work together with governments, with the regulatory bodies, with whom sometimes there's been adversarial relationships or a decrease or a deficit of trust, to try to find ways to come together towards a regulatory approach, a policy approach towards these large platforms that can lead to a safer digital experience, one that is less polarizing, as Ravi's described. So your work across the Sahel has given you some key insights into how to address that trust deficit. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Thank you very much, Lena. And as really you mentioned, it is all this regulatory approach is working where institutions are sometimes strong and where the regulatory authorities can engage effectively with the platforms. But in our context, what we are observing is that the enforcement capacity is very lower, and also the technical expertise is limited and sometimes fragmented also. So it's creates a situation where the platforms operates with limited accountability because there is no this strong institution that will back the regulation or the governance. So to come back to your question, what in practice it mean and what is maybe giving us hopes, it is that the multi-stakeholder approach and the role of all the actors, including civil society, is very important. And I will try just to highlight some specific actors making progressive change on this area. And we have worked, for instance, a lot with UNESCO, right? Actors like UNESCO, which provide with experts normative guidance and develop also regional policies and capacity building for regulators, which supports them to be more effective when it's time to engage with digital platforms. For instance, last year, the 15 countries of West Africa and Sahel adopted the prior policy model on information integrity. And at the civil society fronts, I will give an example of the Bamako Forum on Digital and Social Cohesion that we launched. It's bring together the regulators themselves and the states actors, the civil society, researchers, journalists, and online like bloggers, online users. And more we are bringing in these debates the tech actors. So to make sure that we have a space where the dialogue exists in practice and help to have this soft coordination or multi-stakeholders approach. And the peace builders themselves, the work we are doing is very relevant and in different aspects, because the first one for us is to make sure that we are connectors. We are connecting the access we have in the local communities, the discussion we continue with the regulators, and spaces like this one, or the Council on Tech and Social Cohesion, to make sure that we can translate, we can connect local actors to middle policy making level, but also global and regional discussions. So we are also, as peace builders, the work we do is to make sure we translate what we learn in the community to a message or policy language that can be understood even by the platform themselves. And one other thing that is working well also is how to make sure that we are building multi-stakeholders and multi-partial coalitions, where the work is not to be passive, but to make sure that we push the agenda for the better of for the better of all, and making sure that we have the community and human approach in the middle, and to make sure that all the actors, including regulators, civil society, and platform, contribute directly in this discussion, because it is very large and it's need more broader collaboration. I will be happy maybe to come back exactly on the prior model, for instance, and how also government of Niger is pushing the agenda by creating a working group, taking into account really all the progress in other regions and how they can implement it and use it in their own policy work in country.
Thanks so much, Habibu. We're just going to come to one last dimension of this work. One of the other things that is really striking to me, working globally as a peace builder and now looking at this question of digital governance, is how much research there is in the global north about harms against children, TFGBV, on polarization, on mental health, on well-being, and how little there is, particularly in the conflict-affected context where so many of you joining us today work. And it's why I'll put the link in just now, but when we came together and drafted the Pro-Social Tech Design Governance Guide for Regulation, we included that, as Habibu was saying, as part of trust building, as part of accountability methods, we can look at agreeing on what matters and measure it, and not only rely on transparency reports between the platforms and the regulators, but also have that other perspective of really the human beings' experience with these platforms as a key metric. So Ravi, this has been a space where you've offered enormous leadership. Tell us a little bit more about what's key to measure and how that can help us to advance the conversation. And then we'll be moving on to questions and answers. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think measurement is really important because if you're at a company, um, you know, you hear all this criticism, which is well deserved about stuff that is on your platform, misinformation, hate speech, division. Um, but it's not actionable until you have a metric, right? So like a company needs something to measure. And so that's why they often anchor on things like hate speech or misinformation, because it is something they've at least has a system that they can measure, they can figure out and drive down. Now, I've talked already about why those metrics don't encapsulate the user experience. And I think there's a lot of work we can do to help platforms measure these things better in ways that better reflect, what we're seeing in society. So if you go to the next slide, so when I was at Meta, that we observed that I actually moved from data science, where we're measuring things like hate speech and misinformation, to user research, where we actually were measuring people's user experiences. You actually talk to users and survey them. And so on the upper left, you can actually see a dashboard. This is from fbarchive.org. So it's like this was in part of the Frances Haugen documents. And you see a spike around the George Floyd protests, where people were saying, we were surveying people regularly over time. People were saying, we are seeing things that could cause violence in our community. And, not everything that people say could cause violence in the community is something you want to get rid of, but it's at least a signal that the user experience is changing. And so just that idea of measuring the user experience, I think, can be a very complementary way to understanding what's going on these platforms, as opposed to just relying on what platforms are themselves defining as, policy violating. On the right, you can see another. This is a graph a document that was Arturo Bahar shared in the kids online safety space, and effectively, it's showing the volume of 13 to 15-year-olds who are experiencing all of these various harms. Right, so 10.8% of 13 to 15-year-olds, for example, in a 7-day period on Instagram, say they are a target of bullying and harassment. Which is, a fairly high number if you think about, the volume of kids who are on this platform. So you're seeing both in the kids online safety space and, Buildup's really leading this work in the polarization space, more and more people trying to understand this user experience. And the nice thing about user experience measurement is you don't need to get the cooperation of a platform to do it. Anyone can just survey a sample of the population, ask a sample of the population to share what they're seeing online, and they can start to code content and understand the user experience from their side. So this is, I encourage you to go to the link here. We can put it in the chat. But, Buildup's polarization footprint is a great instantiation of this in practice, not just in a Western country, but in Kenya and places which are have maybe haven't gotten the attention that they deserve. So for example, one finding in Buildup's work is that the average Kenyan spends 20 minutes per day reading threads that express negativity towards an identity group. And I think the other innovation here is not just pointing out that things are difficult online, but pointing out that they're worse on some platforms and better on others. Because that's the kind of thing that can get platforms to reform their design. Like why are things worse on Twitter than they are on, say, YouTube, right? And what is it about those algorithms that are different? What is it about the way that people interact with those systems? One thing, with YouTube, anyone can access it through search, whereas on Twitter, increasingly, you have to be logged in. So there's all these ways that platforms are different, and hopefully by holding people accountable for the user experiences that their specific platform is creating, we can start to understand. We can start to get beyond just saying like things are bad online to things are bad in this country on this app, and it's because of this design. So therefore, we as a regulator, we as a society, are going to do something about it.
Thanks so much, Ravi. And again, it can be particularly helpful when we're operating in contexts where it may not be tomorrow that we have a fully independent, well-resourced regulatory body. And so this idea of having a constituency of buy-in behind the measures that matter to us as peace builders, trying to prevent offline real-world violence, it can be a really important anchor to make sure that the choices that we're making and the trade-offs at times about what is most important to focus on can really be seen in those measures. So that's the end of the presentation. There was a couple questions here just to prompt, what are some of the entry points? What maybe are the risks? But most of all, I'm going to stop sharing, and we'd just love to open it up to see what's on your mind. What is this? What might we want to know more about? I dropped the link in the chat of the Pro-Social Tech Design Regulation Practical Guide, which really seeks to harness the insights of Ravi and Habibu and so many others working in this space to look at how we can advocate for a regulation that can bring about healthier, less polarized, and hopefully more peaceful societies. So I'm going to see if we have any questions in the Q&A, and I do not see any. So I would welcome you to raise your hand if you'd like. Julie, I'm not sure if people have the right to unmute. And if you're unable to speak, you could also put your question in the chat or in the Q&A. Let's just give people a moment to reflect and think for a second. What are the top regulations suggested today in the US? From Adnan. Welcome, Adnan. Okay, so let's hear from you, Ravi, about that question. So, You mentioned a couple at the state level. We know that at the federal level, the United States is not passing regulation at large around digital platforms, and that there is, a real push against anything that can be seen as censorship. So where are we seeing upstream system-focused legislation in the US, Ravi?
So I would say there's two kinds of legislation that I think are most of interest from a polarization standpoint. Again, most of the action is really around kids' online safety, which certainly has implications for polarization. But I would say that or maybe I'll mention three. Like one is you're seeing a lot of privacy by default, and that's in age appropriate design code legislation. It's a lot of the kids online safety legislation, and as Habiba mentioned, there is one reason that, say, for example, women don't participate online as much as they could is because of this. Like the default privacy settings are often like expose people to harassment. There's often a lot of gender-based violence as a result of that. In some areas like India, you have things like locked profile, but in many other places you don't have that privacy, those kinds of privacy settings. So that's one thing that you're seeing. Another is around algorithms. So you're seeing again in a lot of these age pro design code laws. In New York, California, they have called Safe for Kids Acts, where they are really addressing just the algorithms. Now, again, these are again for kids, but they are things that increasingly you're seeing people think, well, these are bad for kids. They're also bad for adults too. What do we do about that in the adult context? And the last set of legislation that I'll point out is interoperability. A law that was passed in Utah, the Digital Choice Act. I encourage people to take a look at. I can put it in the chat. But basically, it allows you to shift from a platform that you think is distasteful or not treating you well to one that maybe serves your interest better. It also allows you to take the data from different platforms and design your own algorithm to mash it up. So you can imagine people who want to move from Twitter to Blue Sky, for example, or who just want to have like a better experience, but maybe, their favorite politician or their favorite soccer star is on a particular platform, so they can't actually move. Or maybe there's a local organization that wants to build a platform that's better for their society, but they can't get traction because of the network effects of the big platforms. So interoperability is a way for local organizations to get traction and for people to have the ability to move between platforms. So that was passed in Utah. It should start to be enforced, later this year, and we'll see if that is something that it's being spread, that idea of interoperability in many other jurisdictions, and we'll see if that takes hold.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up? Because I think so many of us on this call have heard how the algorithm matters to polarization and the ranking and the recommender systems. And at the DSA level, I'm here in Brussels. There's a look at how is it that the recommender systems are a risk in terms of what kind of content they're serving people or how they might be pushing people towards either borderline harmful or eventually illegal content. And then in other instances, we look at that the legislation or policy approach to algorithms as enabling users to have more choices. And then lastly, you also see a lot of focus on transparency. Once we have transparency, we'll have fixed the problem. Can you just offer like your view of what you feel is like amongst the more promising areas to try to mitigate the harms of the algorithms from a peace building perspective?
I mean, I'm a kind of an all of the above person, to be
Okay.
honest. Like, I think you need transparency. Algorithms are complex, right? And so, like, the simple answer that people have had is like, just turn them off, right? But unfortunately, that doesn't quite work because you imagine if you have a chronological feed, then like the divisive person who posts 10,000 times in a month, um, drowns out all the people, the regular people who just post like once in a while, right? So like you can't really just turn off the algorithms. You need algorithms that are actually designed for, say, they're optimized for something other than engagement. So I can put there's a report out of Night Georgetown Better Feeds that I think is a great sort of thoughtful exploration of the space, which includes all the things you mentioned. It includes transparency, it includes policy. And so I think, yeah, you need both of those in order to actually affect change.
Okay, wonderful. All right, we've got three questions here in the Q&A. I'm going to combine sort of two of them, and then I'm going to come back to yours, Benjamin, in a second, as well as the people that are now adding it in the chat, which is okay. I can look at two things at the same time. So we've got Saleha from Normsy asking about what are the incentives of the tech giants to create system architecture that is designed to prevent harm. So, are there incentives that they have? And it's linked with a good question from Theo Dolan, who was recently looking at the New Public's Roundabout platform, trying to bring a designed social media platform to really meet the local community needs. And what would it take to scale those? Is it interoperability only? Are there other things? There is certainly a graveyard of pro-social digital platforms. So maybe you can answer those two, and then I'll be coming to you, Habibu, with one other question. Go ahead.
So yeah, I mean, I'd say we have to create those incentives, right? So they don't exist now, unfortunately, which is why we have the problems we have. But the incentives are being created by you know, just people who are fed up and want to move. But then, interoperability enables them to move, right? So you no longer have to have an account on these platforms to see the content you want to see. Then you also have litigation, right? So another incentive is like you will be sued if you don't do this. Legislation creates incentive. Measurement creates incentives, like for advertisers, right? There are advertisers who don't want to be on platforms that are that people recognize as harmful. So they don't really exist, but we have to create them, right? By creating choice. And then if you create that choice, then like New Public's Roundabout might scale, right? It's going to have trouble in a world where if I we all have too much stuff already, right? So it's going to be hard to have like yet another place that I check things which doesn't have all the network effects, all the organizations aren't already on it. So we need like things that create those incentives that allow people to make choices that sort of hold platforms accountable and allow measurement if we're really going to create those incentives.
The more I've learned in this space, and I share this with all humility, I believe that where we've seen tech design change, it's because of regulation, meaning fear of a fine, litigation, meaning things have been exposed and there was a court case that then led to some kind of sanction, or reputation, although it's been more and more difficult to elevate some of these issues. But indeed, the measurement and there's a lot of focus right now on, we didn't talk about that too much today, on the monetization incentives. Not only the platform design, but the monetization incentives built in with this business model that are rewarding people for producing this kind of outrageous content that can go viral with the different design mechanics. I want to come to you, Habibu, with a question from Helena. Just looking at this enormous geography that is not regulated beyond the US, the EU, and Australia, and what do you feel are the avenues to advocate for that design change? Are we going to be effective if we move, from 1 to 53 countries in Africa? Are we talking about regional bodies? Should we be looking at the AU and ASEAN and other kinds of more regional bodies? What are your thoughts, Habibu?
Thank you very much, Lena. I was looking at the question because really it is the daily discussion we have. When it comes to specifically the West Africa region, or more broadly in Africa, there is two main things that we are seeing, or that are look like governance, which is not specifically digital governance, but which are the levers that the state actors have now. The first one is the internet shutdown. I think even right now there is Gabon, where the social media, all the social media are closed for a time. And also, second is the reactive digital policies, which is how just to have a cybersecurity law. And these laws specifically targets users. They do not engage effective debate with platforms. So these are the two things, but we are seeing shifts from there, because regulators, civil society are understanding that they cannot be just the 2 points. There is now years ago, regulators from Refram adopted, which is the Declaration d'Abidjan, which is a kind of, it's not a regulation itself, but
Voluntary code. Yeah. Voluntary
exactly,
agreement. Yeah.
a voluntary code in which they have set some principles, including having a debate and a discussion with platforms, making sure that they have focal points from platform, because they realize that reactive policies and internet shutdown are not the only responses. And I was talking about the prior policy, which is a more large discussion across the West Africa countries and the Sahel countries on regulating, having a kind of model policy which will help the regulators and the state actors to coordinate first at the regional level, because they need to have also this coordination to better discuss with the with platforms, but also to have a framework which will help them to implement and have a better understanding at the country level. And we just come from the global internet governance in Pretoria, where the agenda is now being pushed to move from this model policy for West Africa to a more concrete regulators guide. So this work is also supported by experts guidance. You see, I think Lena shared in the chat the regulatory guide that she led. There is other literatures pushing for this agenda. And what I think I find very helpful in the regulation guide that will discuss it as Pretoria is that there is even like indexes and concrete. I don't know if I have the word in English right now, but there is a concrete a document that's help, for instance, regulators and tech companies to sit together and how to also draft a policy law on this space, and how to make sure that also we have this multi-stakeholder approach. So I think the debate is moving forward. I highlighted briefly the Niger case, which set up a working group to work on information integrity. I'm discussing with a lot of regulators and researchers across the region. There is will to translate all this regional work to more appropriation at the country level and better coordination at the regional level to continue engaging the platforms.
Right. Thank you. I just want to add, I want to just underscore a few things about this question, because we have, more than 30 people who are peace building and working in this space of conflict transformation. I would love to see more engagement and multi-partial advocacy around this. Because number one, there is a huge trust deficit between these regulators, who sometimes are political appointees, who may not have had an incredibly agreeable relationship with some in the media or in the opposition parties. And to really lean into this space and say, look, what we're trying to achieve is a healthier digital space, one that doesn't push out women and other vulnerable groups because of system design, one that enables healthier discourse to be amplified and incentivized. And that this will, as we heard from Habibu, this will be a complement to all the other work that you're doing in the mediation and dialogue and conflict transformation space. And sometimes it's not necessarily a very clear, direct line towards how we get policy to be made. You heard Ravi mention a few times the child safety space as being a little bit ahead in terms of seeing policy wins that seek to regulate the upstream things. Those can be things that as peace builders, we can say, look, those kinds of things are possible. Let's also make them matter for decreasing polarization, for ensuring that there's healthier spaces when we're dealing with crises and elections and, of course, ongoing conflict. And I think that for different reasons, there's been a little bit, I'll end here, that there's a little bit of a segregation of civil society groups that are protecting freedom of speech and digital rights. And maybe that agenda is then seen as different than those advocating for peaceful, healthy societies. So again, some of the resources on the Council on Tech and Social Cohesion that you can see on our website, techandsocialcohesion.org, really aim to bring more people in to this journey of change, including peace builders. Thanks very much. What are the problems that we face in expanding the work? Well, that's interesting, Adnan. I feel like you were just reading my mind, because I was trying to say that I think there's not enough allies and advocates behind this. But let's maybe hear from Ravi as well. How would you answer that question from Adnan? How do we get more momentum and more expansion behind this work?
I mean, one reason I'm here is I think the moderation paradigm leads to a natural backlash, and like a legitimate criticism that you know who should be the judge of what is misinformation, who should be the judge of what is too divisive. And so I think the free speech argument has I think it's used disingenuously by platforms to evade all regulation, but I also think it's based on a kernel of truth that we need to fight against. We shouldn't like play into it by trying to call for, more moderation, more those people should have their accounts taken down. Those people should, it's just it's not, I'm not saying there aren't people who should have their accounts taken down. It's just like but the more you do that, the more it sort of plays into that battle in society where it becomes a partisan issue about whose voices should be heard, when there's actually a lot of consensus that none of us really like platforms that are optimized for engagement. It's just like we all think it's bad for many reasons. So trying to get it out of the partisan realm and trying to get it out of those free speech debates by really focusing less on moderation, I think is like the biggest opportunity and addresses the biggest barrier.
Yeah. And I think, it again, in really fragile and conflict affected contexts, as you heard Habibu say, whereby people try to focus on the bad user, bad content, lock them up, pull their account down, take down the content, that also often leads to just more adversarial and decreases in trust and cohesion. Let's take this question from Julie about, that there's a lot of discussion from a tech rights, data sovereignty crowd that the lawsuit outcomes. You spoke about the addictive nature of the product being fined in these recent lawsuits in the United States, that has implications for privacy. And this is, there's questions around human rights activists who need anonymity, but we're sometimes maybe not seeing the peace builders' voice in that. So if you want to maybe comment on that, and then maybe we'll give any last thoughts to Habibu before we close.
I mean, so I think there's a lot of these age verification ways that age verification can happen that actually don't have a lot to do with privacy. So a lot of the laws that are being written right now, they sort of encourage anonymous access to content as opposed to account-based access to content. So kids can still access whatever they want. And so there are laws that are written very content-based. The Online Safety Act in the UK is an example, and I think there's legitimate questions about the idea of like age gating specific content. But then there are other laws that are written more about age gating accounts, and I think those have very different implications. So I think peace builders really have a lot to offer as the traditional defenders of of free expression, of activism, about like how do we make that balance? And I think it is an important balance. Nothing is going to be perfect, but there are definitely better ways and worse ways. You see device level verification, for example. Like, if you're a parent, indicating that this is an 11-year-old using this phone, and everyone treating that person as an 11-year-old, it really doesn't have a lot of like privacy, issues, because you're not age gating content. You're sort of identifying the younger users, not trying to identify the older users. So there are definitely better and worse ways to do it that I think peace builders should be weighing in on. Nothing's going to be perfect, but there's definitely a way to do this that hopefully this community can engage in.
Yeah, thank you very much. And and I think that there is a lot of different approaches being advocated around how to keep children safe, from the bans to other kinds of assurance or verification methods. And so, yeah, it can be difficult to follow all of it as a peace builder. I wonder, Habibu, if you have, again, any other last comments around, what can make us making more progress, and if there's any, concerns that you feel peace builders need to be cautious about as they step into this space of advocating for governance and policy.
Thank you very much, Lena. And again, seeing things from where I'm based here in Mali, just because when it comes to talking about how to engage tech platforms, so this is really a new question where people they know the power that the platforms have and all of that. But the reality is that it is really a legitimate debate going on, and I think which is irreversible. And so the real question is for our region here, how to do it. And I think the peace builders have a concrete role to making sure that they work as connectors of the actors, but also as the translators of how the community experiment all these harms and how it affects their daily lives, and how we can make sure at Peace Builder we are these connectors and translators. The second point is, again, I think, Lena, you were saying that observing this question needs modesty, which means putting all the forces together, having someone like Ravi that work in the companies, or researchers, or people living the experience in country. A lot of our partners are really doing this fact checking every day because they care about their community. I think we need to have this multi-stakeholders and multi-partial approach, which is a positive agenda to make sure that all this agenda move together, and to make sure that also the efforts ongoing. I was talking about the UNESCO, the state actors trying to make sure that they have this joint engagement, to make sure we have this level of regional collaboration as well, which can be owned at the country level. Thank you very much.
Let me just
Over to
come
you,
in to
Julie. Yeah.
say, perfect.
Yeah.
I just want to thank the three of you so much for joining, for kickstarting this really interesting conversation within this group of people, though I know that you're expanding it farther in your own networks, and for all the links and the resources. And thank you to everyone who's come and asked great questions and engaged and shared their own resources in the chat as well. We'll be sharing out a recording of this on the Build Up's YouTube webinar playlist. And so you'll get a follow-up email with that link there. And thank you again for joining.